So just a little bit about me. My background is both in cultural anthropology, looking at youth identity development in activist contexts, so a little bit far afield from what we're talking about today. But my other sort of professional trajectory is in math education. And so the work I do now is both around, it's all about math education, but also in particular about social emotional learning in the context of math learning. The rationale for focusing on social emotional learning. So this is probably known to most people in the room, but there's a collective recognition across the fields of educational research and among practitioners and all kinds of movements for educational reform in the last 3-4 decades about the value and purpose of education being not just knowledge transmission and not just academic content learning, not just mastery of disciplinary skills that are very narrowly defined, but that there is this beyond academic content. And in recent history, the social emotional learning competencies have been named as non-cognitive skills for lots of reasons, which I'm sure you can imagine that terminology has been rejected. Metacognition, soft skills, and there are other terms. Current social emotional research and development, so there's lots of different research studies, research groups, practitioner organizations, nonprofit organizations, private companies, lots of work in this area. And one of the things that has come out of that work is lots of names for these competencies. So I have 4 here listed. Hazel actually has 6, but they are self-awareness, self-management, relationship skills, responsible decision-making. Another very widely circulating term for these competencies is growth mindset, which we heard about in the introduction. So, like I said, lots of terms for these competencies. These are just 4 examples to give you an idea of what this beyond is about. So just a few challenges in conducting research on social emotional learning. One challenge is the tendency to isolate instruction or assessment of social emotional learning from academic content learning and assessment. And so, and this is a challenge because what a lot of people want to know is, how do these things support each other? So how does social emotional learning support academic learning? So in reality and in practice, there's this urgent need to answer questions about how these go together, but in research design, it's very hard to bring them together. So the question I posed to this group is, can social robots help in this regard? Another challenge lies in measuring growth. So if we can, figure out how to measure social emotional learning in the moment, how can you measure growth? So change over time, or in longitudinal studies. That's sort of an additional layer of research challenge. And I think social robots probably can help. And then a final challenge, these aren't the only 3, of course, but the final one I'll mention is the significant role of teacher and researcher bias that come into play immediately in the dynamics between teacher-student interaction or researcher-student interaction, particularly when it comes to students with different language backgrounds, just different cultural backgrounds, different manners of speaking. And so I do think robots can help here, and we've heard already, I've learned a lot about that in the presentation so far. So I think that's a big promise in this work. So using social emotional frameworks to situate related research and interventions. One line of research is identity development. So identity of children as learners is a very important dimension of social emotional learning. Language development for multilingual students, we've heard a little bit about that already. So it's not just for multilingual students, but disciplinary language learning for all students as well are important competencies in collaboration, communicating, critiquing, reasoning, interpreting and understanding the perspectives and ideas of others. so student-to-student interpretation of student talk and student expressions of ideas. Equity considerations, so those are important for looking at identity development processes and for work on language development. And I hope that the connection to these considerations are clear in my comments coming up. And then social emotional competencies are often currently associated with phrases like college and career ready, global citizenship, deeper learning. So there's lots of kind of initiatives, programs, policies that are associated with social emotional learning in ways that articulate this beyond of education from a policy context. So I'm not going to talk too much about that, but that is also framed inside of SEL research and practice. So research on identity processes and equity or inequity in schools. So two major strands of this kind of work are analysis of the social interactions among students and between students and teachers, and the ways that these interactions co-construct and reinforce stereotypes about who is good at math, for example, and that's my area, so I'm very familiar with that, but there may be parallel constructs in other content areas. But I think math is a particularly, for all kinds of reasons, sharp area where that kind of status matters a lot for students' experiences in math classrooms. So who is smart, who belongs in the school. And then also research and development of interventions designed to disrupt the reproduction of these social narratives about ability and smartness and belonging. So using social emotional frameworks to make sense of identity development in school settings. So examinations of the differential status of students as valued contributors to discussions and group work. So interventions designed to frame students who are traditionally lower status for different reasons as valuable contributors. So that's one kind of area of active work and kind of outcomes of using an SEL framework. Complex instruction is an example of one of those pedagogical strategies for making sure all students feel that they belong and are valued contributors to group work and to discussions. And then ethnographic analyses, as I mentioned before, of student-to-student interaction and student-to-teacher interaction. And then actually this should be a fourth bullet, research on the self-concept of learners. So how to develop a positive learner identity for students in school settings. So another line of research is about supporting language development. In recent decades, interventions focused on ESL students, and typically the strategy was to take students out of their academic courses and focus very explicitly and sort of technically on the English language. And so more recent research has shown that language learning and academic content learning can and should happen simultaneously. And so there's been this shift in the approach to supporting English language learners, which is to keep them in the flow of learning with all students and support all teachers in being better at supporting language development inside their regular instruction, rather than this separation of English and then academic content. And I've been involved in some work specifically for math around how to do that, how to support teachers in doing that. Using SEL frameworks to make sense of language development in school settings. And this is just a little bit more of a, scratching the surface a little bit on the research I'm involved in, which is, these are 4 design principles that are for supporting language development inside of specifically math classrooms and inside of math curriculum as well. And so the design principles are optimizing output. And optimizing here isn't, I just want to call that out for a minute because I think robots may be able to help with this. So when we say optimizing output, teachers and other educators think that means just get students to say as much as we can, just get a lot of stuff out there. And the optimizing is really important because it's signaling that it matters what it is that students are asked to talk about, and it matters how they're asked to talk about it. And what you're optimizing for depends on what is the academic content that you're learning, who are the students, you know, what are you optimizing for? And unless you can identify that, then just getting students to say a bunch of stuff or write a bunch of stuff for older students isn't an efficient strategy for supporting language development. So building on attention to the importance of collaboration and communication across the content areas, and then the more sophisticated elaborations of these skills in terms of critiquing the reasoning of others, understanding the reasoning of others, understanding the perspectives and ideas of others, you know, all of the empathy dimensions there. Researchers at Stanford that I've been working with for the past 2 years are exploring what instructional strategies support these 4 design principles. And I can say a lot more about that if anybody's interested. So back to equity considerations. So this is just some high-level takeaways from the research I've been involved in with the language development, as well as a research project, a 3-year project I'm currently involved in on measuring social emotional learning in schools. So to support students' sense of belonging and sense of agency in their own learning process, it's very clear that learning experiences and instructional practices that do this can go a long way toward more equitable schooling experiences and outcomes for kids. And then the work I have been and am currently involved in supporting language development and cultivating positive learner identities and measuring social emotional learning all point to the benefits of giving students voice and choice during learning tasks, including opportunities to make decisions about their own learning process, revise their thinking and their work. And here I think the work with robots is potentially a major area, and then interpret and critique others' ideas. So this opportunities for students to revise what they're saying and get that feedback, I think is clearly the capacity of the robots, but also potentially an area where humans can learn from robots on how to do that better. Because I think the idea of feedback, giving students feedback on their work and on their verbal output, is not something that a lot of teachers are good at or know how to do. And so if that's something that we can figure out how to make robots good at, maybe humans can learn from robots on how to do that better.